Before we begin, write in the comments which city and country you're watching from. This channel exists to record stories that should never have been forgotten. In the summer of 1867, a newly freed black man walked into a Charleston bank and requested a meeting with the president. The bank president, amused by the audacity, agreed to see him. The man, dressed in simple workers' clothing but carrying himself with unusual confidence, made a prediction. The bank would face a severe financial crisis within 6 months, unless specific investments were divested immediately. He named 3 companies. He provided dates. He explained the economic patterns he had observed. The bank president laughed him out of the building. 6 months later, all 3 companies collapsed. The bank lost over $200,000, a fortune in 1867. The bank president, facing ruin, sent investigators to find the man who had warned him. They discovered something impossible. The man had been enslaved until 2 years prior. He had never received formal education. He had never studied finance or economics, yet he had predicted a financial collapse with precision that defied explanation. His name was Isaiah, and his story, documented in bank records, court testimonies, newspaper articles, and private letters, reveals a man whose mind worked in ways that 19th century America could neither understand nor accept. They called him a fraud. They called him dangerous. They called him impossible. They never called him what he was, a visionary who saw patterns in the world that others couldn't perceive, and who used that gift to survive, to rise, and to challenge every assumption about what a formerly enslaved black man could become. This is the story of how he did it, and what it cost him. The first record of Isaiah appears in a slave inventory from a South Carolina plantation dated 1842. The entry is brief. Male child, approximately 4 years old, born on property. Mother deceased in childbirth, assigned to field labor at appropriate age. The plantation was owned by a man named Virgil Blackwood, whose records survive in remarkable detail due to a legal dispute after the Civil War. Blackwood was methodical, obsessive about documentation, and deeply invested in the efficiency of his operation. For the first decade of Isaiah's life, the records show nothing unusual. He worked in the fields from age 6 onward, performed adequately, caused no disciplinary problems. He was, by all accounts, exactly what a slaveholder wanted: invisible, compliant, unremarkable. But in 1853, something changed. An overseer's report from March 1853 contains the first hint of what would make Isaiah extraordinary. The boy Isaiah, age approximately 15, made an unusual statement today. He told me that rain would come tomorrow at midday and that we should move the harvested tobacco to covered storage. I dismissed this as presumption. The sky was clear. But the next day, at noon precisely, a storm struck. The tobacco we had not moved was ruined. When I asked the boy how he knew, he said only, "I could feel it coming." I do not know what this means. Over the next year, similar incidents accumulated. Isaiah predicted weather patterns with uncanny accuracy. He could look at crop fields and predict yields weeks before harvest. He warned of a barn fire 3 days before it occurred, an incident recorded in insurance documents when Blackwood filed a claim. Blackwood's private journal from 1854 shows a man struggling to understand what he possessed. Isaiah continues to demonstrate knowledge that should be impossible for someone of his station and lack of education. Yesterday, he told me that the Jones plantation would fail within the year due to soil exhaustion and poor crop rotation. I dismissed it as ignorant speculation. Today, I learned that Jones is indeed facing bankruptcy for precisely those reasons. I have begun to wonder if the boy possesses some form of unnatural perception. But I am a rational man. I do not believe in witchcraft or second sight. There must be a logical explanation. There wasn't. Or rather, there was. but it wasn't one that a white slaveholder in 1854 South Carolina could accept, that an enslaved black teenager was simply more intelligent, more observant, and more analytically capable than the educated white men around him. To understand what Isaiah represented, you must understand the world that contained him. The 1850s American South existed within a rigid social and economic system built on slavery. This wasn't just about labor, it was about identity, power, and the fundamental belief that white people were intellectually superior to black people. This belief was codified in law, justified by religion, and supported by the emerging field of racial science. Physicians published papers claiming to prove biological differences in brain structure. Ministers preached that enslavement was divinely ordained. The entire civilization rested on one premise, that black people were incapable of higher reasoning and therefore suited only for manual labor under white supervision. Isaiah's abilities, his capacity to observe patterns, analyze systems, and predict outcomes, threatened this entire structure, because if one enslaved person could demonstrate intelligence that surpassed educated white men, what did that say about the system itself? Virgil Blackwood understood this threat instinctively. His journal entries from 1855 show increasing anxiety. I have begun testing Isaiah systematically. I give him problems, mathematical calculations, logistical challenges, strategic questions about plantation management. He solves them with ease. More disturbing, he often provides solutions I had not considered, solutions that prove superior to my own. Yesterday, he suggested a different crop rotation schedule that would increase yields by an estimated 20%. I implemented it. He was correct. I am profiting from the intelligence of a man I claim is my inferior. The contradiction is becoming unbearable. But Blackwood did not free Isaiah. Instead, he did what many slaveholders did when confronted with uncomfortable truths. He rationalized. He convinced himself that Isaiah was an exception, a rare anomaly that proved the rule rather than challenged it, and he began to exploit Isaiah's abilities for profit. Between 1855 and 1860, Virgil Blackwood used Isaiah as what we might now call a strategic consultant. He consulted Isaiah on business decisions, crop planning, and investment opportunities. He did this secretly. No other plantation owners could know he was relying on an enslaved person's judgment. Isaiah's predictions were documented extensively in Blackwood's business correspondence. 1856, cotton investment. Isaiah warned Blackwood not to expand cotton production, predicting a price collapse. Blackwood ignored the advice. Cotton prices fell sharply in 1857, and Blackwood lost significant income. He noted, "I should have listened to Isaiah." 1857, railroad stock. Isaiah advised investing in a specific railroad company. Blackwood invested a small amount, skeptical but curious. The stock tripled in value within 18 months. 1858, weather prediction. Isaiah warned of an early frost that would devastate crops if harvest wasn't accelerated. Blackwood acted on this advice. The frost came exactly when Isaiah predicted, and while neighboring plantations lost entire harvests, Blackwood's was largely preserved. 1859, labor management. Isaiah suggested reorganizing work schedules to reduce worker exhaustion and illness. Blackwood implemented the changes. Worker productivity increased by 15%, and deaths from overwork decreased. Each success made Blackwood wealthier, and each success made him more dependent on Isaiah's mind, a dependency that filled him with resentment and fear. A letter Blackwood wrote to his brother in 1859 reveals the psychological conflict. "I am making more money than ever before, largely because I have learned to trust Isaiah's judgment. But this trust feels like a betrayal of everything I believe. How can I claim that Negroes are inferior when I rely upon one to manage my financial affairs? How can I justify slavery when the man I enslave is demonstrably more capable than I am?" I find myself hoping that Isaiah will fail, will prove himself wrong, so that I can return to certainty. But he does not fail, and I do not know what that means. But before we continue with what happened next, write in the comments, have you ever known something was true, but been afraid to admit it because it would change everything? That's what Virgil Blackwood faced every day. The Civil War began in April 1861. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, and Charleston was the site of the war's opening shots. The Blackwood plantation, like all Southern plantations, was immediately affected. Men went to war, supplies became scarce, and the system that had seemed permanent suddenly appeared fragile. Isaiah was 23 years old when the war began. According to Blackwood's records, Isaiah predicted the war's outcome almost immediately. A journal entry from May 1861. Isaiah told me today that the South will lose this war. I asked how he could possibly know this. He explained, the North has more factories, more railroads, more population, more money. The South has cotton and conviction. Conviction cannot defeat industrial capacity over a long war. You will lose in 4 to 5 years. I called him a traitor and had him whipped for insolence. But I find myself unable to stop thinking about his reasoning. It is sound, terrifyingly sound. Isaiah was correct. The war lasted 4 years, and the South lost. But during those 4 years, something remarkable happened. Isaiah began preparing for freedom. Testimony from other enslaved people on the Blackwood plantation, collected by Freedmen's Bureau agents in 1865, describes what Isaiah did during the war. Isaiah, he started teaching us things, not reading and writing, that would have got us all killed. But he taught us about money, about business, about how the world worked. He'd say, the war is going to end. We're going to be free. But freedom without knowledge is just a different kind of prison. You need to understand how white people think, how they do business, how they control things. Because when we're free, they're still going to try to control us. And the only way to resist is to be smarter than they are. Another testimony. Isaiah told us in 1863 that the war would end in 1865 and that we'd be free. He told us to start planning, to think about what skills we had, what we could sell, how we could survive. Some people thought he was dreaming, but he was right. He was always right. When Union troops arrived in South Carolina in 1865, Isaiah was ready. He had no money, no land, no legal documents. But he had something more valuable, a mind that could see patterns others missed and a plan for how to use it. The Emancipation Proclamation and the Union victory freed approximately 4 million enslaved people. For most, freedom came without resources, no land, no money, no education, and surrounded by a hostile white population determined to maintain racial hierarchy through new means. The period immediately following the war, Reconstruction, was a time of both possibility and terror. The federal government established the Freedmen's Bureau to help formerly enslaved people transition to freedom. Some black people acquired land, started businesses, and began building communities. But they did so against systematic opposition, black codes that restricted movement and labor, violence from groups like the Ku Klux Klan, and economic exploitation by white landowners. Isaiah navigated this world with the same analytical precision he had applied to plantation management, but now he worked for himself. The first documentation of Isaiah as a free man appears in Freedmen's Bureau records from Charleston, dated June 1865. Isaiah, no last name recorded, registered today as a freedman. He stated his intention to work as a laborer while learning business practices. He demonstrates unusual articulateness and clarity of purpose. When asked about his plans, he stated, I intend to become wealthy, not because I love money, but because money is power, and power is the only thing white people respect. I noted this as evidence of appropriate ambition. Isaiah chose the surname Freeman, a common choice among the formerly enslaved. and began working in Charleston. He took jobs on the docks, loading cargo. He worked in warehouses, organizing inventory. He accepted any work that allowed him to observe how commerce functioned. And he listened. He watched. He learned. A dock supervisor's report from August 1865 notes, "The freedman Isaiah Freeman is an exceptional worker. He has reorganized our cargo loading procedures, resulting in 30% faster turnaround. I do not know where he learned logistics, but his methods are superior to ours." Within 6 months, Isaiah had saved enough money to rent a small room and begin his real work, using his predictive abilities to make money. Charleston in 1866 was a city in chaos. The war had destroyed infrastructure, displaced populations, and collapsed the economy. Banks were failing, businesses were closing, and fortunes were being made and lost daily. It was a world of uncertainty, which made it perfect for someone who could see patterns in chaos. Isaiah began offering his services as what we might now call a business consultant. He approached small business owners, white and black, and offered predictions. Which investments would succeed, which businesses would fail, which commodities would rise or fall in price. At first, no one took him seriously. A black man, barely literate, offering financial advice? It was absurd. But Isaiah had learned something during his years of slavery. White people would dismiss him until his predictions proved accurate. Then, they would use his knowledge while denying its source. He offered his first predictions for free with one condition. If he was right, the business owner would pay him and hire him again. If he was wrong, he would walk away. A testimony from a Charleston merchant named Thomas Whitley, given in a civil case in 1869, describes his first encounter with Isaiah. In March 1866, a Negro man named Isaiah Freeman approached me. He said he could help my business. I was amused. What could a recently freed slave know about business? But he made specific predictions. Tobacco prices would drop in April, cotton would rise in May, and there would be a shortage of salt in June. I dismissed him, but I kept a record of his predictions out of curiosity. Every single one was correct. When he returned in July, I hired him immediately. Isaiah began working for Whitley, advising on purchasing decisions and inventory management. Whitley's business, which had been struggling, became profitable within months. Word spread. Quietly, through whispers and coded references, other merchants began seeking Isaiah's advice, always discreetly. No white merchant wanted to publicly admit he relied on a black man's intelligence. But privately, Isaiah's client list grew, and with each correct prediction, his fees increased. By late 1866, Isaiah had accumulated enough capital to make his first major investment. He purchased a small warehouse near the Charleston docks. The purchase was recorded in city property records, one of the first instances of a formerly enslaved person buying commercial property in Charleston after the war. The purchase price was $400, a significant sum for someone who had been enslaved 18 months earlier. How did Isaiah accumulate this money? His client records, preserved in a legal dispute years later, show he was charging fees ranging from $5 to $50 per consultation, with additional percentages on successful investments he recommended. But the warehouse purchase wasn't just about storage space. It was strategic. Isaiah had predicted, correctly, that Charleston's port would recover faster than overland trade, and that controlling warehouse space near the docks would become highly profitable. Within 6 months, he was renting space to merchants at rates that made his investment profitable. Within a year, he had purchased a second warehouse. A letter from Virgil Blackwood to his brother, dated November 1866, reveals the former slaveholder's reaction. "I have learned that Isaiah, my former property, now owns 2 warehouses in Charleston and is conducting business as if he were a white man. I am told he is advising merchants and making predictions about market conditions. Some of those merchants are people I know, people of standing. They use his services while pretending they do not. It is intolerable. A Negro should not possess such wealth or influence. Something must be done. Something was done. In January 1867, Isaiah was arrested. The arrest was documented in Charleston police records. Isaiah Freeman, Negro, charged with fraud and obtaining money under false pretenses. Complainant, Virgil Blackwood, property owner. Blackwood's complaint alleged that Isaiah had defrauded him by providing false predictions during the years of his enslavement, and that any money Isaiah now possessed was therefore illegally obtained. The legal theory was absurd. An enslaved person couldn't defraud their enslaver because enslaved people had no legal standing and received no compensation for their labor anyway. But the real goal wasn't a valid legal case. The goal was intimidation. Isaiah was held in jail for 3 weeks before trial. During that time, Blackwood attempted to convince other merchants to testify against Isaiah, claiming he was a charlatan who made lucky guesses and took credit for ordinary business acumen. None of them would testify because they all knew Isaiah's predictions were genuine and they were still using his services. The trial took place in February 1867. Court transcripts preserved in the Charleston County Archives reveal a proceeding that was more about racial control than justice. Blackwood's attorney argued, "This Negro has accumulated wealth through deception. He claims to predict future events, which is clearly impossible. Any success he has had is due to chance or to information he stole from his betters. The fact that he now owns property and conducts business as if he were a white man is an offense to natural order and social stability." Isaiah represented himself. He couldn't afford an attorney, and no white lawyer would take his case. His defense was simple. He made predictions. Those predictions proved accurate, and he was paid for his services. No fraud had occurred. But he did something else during the trial. Something that court observers found remarkable. He made a prediction. According to the court transcript, the defendant Freeman stated, "Mr. Blackwood claims I defraud people by making predictions, so I will make a prediction now in this court on the record. In March of this year, there will be a fire on King Street that destroys 3 buildings. In April, cotton prices will fall by 15%. In May, Mr. Blackwood's plantation will experience crop failure due to flooding from excessive rain. If these predictions prove false, convict me. If they prove true, you will know I am not a fraud." The judge dismissed the predictions as irrelevant theatrics. The jury, all white men, deliberated for less than an hour. They found Isaiah guilty of fraud and sentenced him to 1 year of hard labor and forfeiture of all property. Isaiah appealed the verdict. While the appeal was pending, 3 things happened. March 1867. A fire on King Street destroyed 3 buildings, exactly as Isaiah predicted. April 1867, cotton prices fell by 16%, almost precisely the percentage Isaiah had stated. May 1867, excessive rains caused flooding across South Carolina, devastating crops including those on Blackwood's plantation. A Charleston newspaper, the Daily Courier, published a brief notice about the King Street fire. At the bottom of the article, an editor had added, "It should be noted that the Negro Isaiah Freeman predicted this fire during his recent trial." The prediction was made on February 20th. The fire occurred on March 15th. We offer no explanation for this coincidence. The appeal was heard in June 1867. The appellate judge, reviewing the case and the subsequent events, made a decision that shocked Charleston society. He overturned the conviction and ordered Isaiah's property returned. The judge's written opinion included this passage: "While this court does not endorse the defendant's claims of predictive ability, we find no evidence of fraud. The defendant provided advice. That advice proved accurate, and he was compensated for services rendered. Whether his accuracy is due to intelligence, observation, or chance is irrelevant. No crime has been committed. The conviction is overturned." Isaiah walked out of court a free man with his property intact. But he had made powerful enemies. Between June 1867 and December 1868, Isaiah's business expanded rapidly. He now owned 4 warehouses, had clients across Charleston and beyond, and was becoming wealthy by any standard, an almost unthinkable achievement for a black man in 1867 South Carolina. But success brought danger. White supremacist groups, the Ku Klux Klan most prominently, were systematically terrorizing successful black people across the South. Businesses were burned. People were beaten or killed. The message was clear: black people would not be allowed to accumulate wealth or power. Isaiah received his first threat in July 1867. A letter delivered anonymously. Nature. Freeman, you think you can own property and do business like a white man. You are wrong. Leave Charleston or you will be removed. The natural order will be restored. Isaiah did not leave. Instead, he did something unexpected. He hired protection. He employed armed guards, black veterans of the Union Army, to protect his warehouses. He never traveled alone, and he began making predictions about the people who threatened him. A remarkable document survives from this period, a ledger in which Isaiah kept notes on the men he believed were targeting him. Next to each name, he wrote predictions. Thomas Crawford will be arrested for embezzlement, November 1867. William Morton, business will fail by February 1868 due to poor investments. Samuel Price will die in riding accident, December 1867. These were not wishes. They were predictions based on information Isaiah had gathered. Crawford's business records showed evidence of fraud. Morton had invested heavily in failing companies. Price was known to ride drunk. The predictions proved accurate. Crawford was arrested in November. Morton declared bankruptcy in February. Price died in a riding accident in December. His horse bolted and he fell, striking his head on a stone. The pattern was clear. Isaiah had figured out how to weaponize his predictive abilities. He couldn't stop white supremacists from hating him, but he could anticipate their actions and prepare. And he could identify vulnerabilities in his enemies that would lead to their downfall. A letter from a Freedmen's Bureau agent stationed in Charleston, dated January 1868, describes the situation. The Negro Isaiah Freeman has become a figure of considerable controversy. White citizens claim he is dangerous, possibly involved in some form of witchcraft or Negro magic. Black citizens view him as a hero, proof that intelligence and strategy can overcome oppression. I have met Mr. Freeman. He is rational, articulate, and demonstrably intelligent. His predictions appear to be the result of careful observation and logical analysis, but in a society that believes Negroes incapable of such intelligence, his abilities appear supernatural. This makes him both powerful and endangered. The danger escalated in March 1868 when Isaiah predicted something that would change his life forever. In March 1868, Isaiah announced publicly, in a speech at a black community gathering, that the cotton market would collapse within 2 years, devastating the Southern economy and forcing a fundamental restructuring of agriculture. This prediction was recorded in a black-owned newspaper, the Charleston Advocate. Mr. Isaiah Freeman, a successful colored businessman, addressed a gathering at the Emmanuel AME Church. He warned that the current dependence on cotton cultivation is unsustainable. He predicted that overproduction, soil exhaustion, and competition from other regions will cause cotton prices to collapse by 1870. He urged colored farmers to diversify crops and learn new trades. His prediction was met with mixed reactions. Some see him as a prophet, others as an alarmist. White plantation owners read this prediction with fury. If Isaiah was right, their entire economic system would collapse. If he was wrong, he was spreading panic and discouraging cotton cultivation. Either way, they wanted him silenced. What happened next is documented in multiple sources, all telling the same story. a coordinated campaign to destroy Isaiah economically, and if that failed, physically. First, banks began refusing to lend to him. Merchants who had previously worked with him were pressured to cut ties. City officials found regulatory violations in his warehouses, violations that had been ignored when white merchants committed them but were now enforced strictly against Isaiah. When economic pressure didn't work, violence was attempted. On April 15, 1868, two men attacked Isaiah on the street. They beat him severely, breaking his ribs and leaving him unconscious. Police records show the attack was reported, but no investigation was conducted. Isaiah survived. And when he recovered, he did something that demonstrated both his analytical mind and his understanding of power. He left Charleston, but he didn't run. He strategically relocated to a place where he could operate with less resistance: New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans in 1868 was different from Charleston. It was a cosmopolitan city with a large, free black population that had existed before the Civil War, a more complex racial hierarchy, and a culture of commerce that valued profit over rigid social codes, at least marginally more than Charleston did. Isaiah arrived in New Orleans in May 1868 with approximately $3,000 in capital, a significant fortune, and immediately began rebuilding his business network. Within 6 months, he had established himself as a cotton factor, a middleman who purchased cotton from farmers and sold it to textile mills. This was traditionally a business dominated by white merchants, but Isaiah had two advantages. He could predict price fluctuations with uncanny accuracy, and he was willing to work with black farmers who were excluded from white-owned factoring houses. Business records from this period show Isaiah's success. July 1868, purchased 500 bales of cotton at $0.12 per pound. Sold 3 months later at $0.18 per pound. Profit, $4,500. November 1868, warned clients to delay purchases, predicting a price drop. Cotton fell from $0.15 to $0.11 within 6 weeks. Clients who followed his advice saved thousands. March 1869, predicted early season shortage due to delayed planting. Purchased heavily when prices were low. Shortage occurred. Prices spiked. Profit, $8,000. By the end of 1869, Isaiah Freeman was one of the wealthiest black men in New Orleans. He owned property, employed workers, and had built a business that served both black and white clients. But he had also made his most famous prediction public, the cotton collapse, and that prediction was about to come true. In 1870, exactly as Isaiah had predicted, the cotton market collapsed. Overproduction, soil exhaustion, and competition from new cotton-growing regions created a perfect storm. Cotton prices fell from an average of $0.15 per pound in 1869 to $0.08 per pound by late 1870, a devastating drop that bankrupted hundreds of southern planters. Isaiah, who had diversified his investments and warned his clients, survived the collapse financially intact. Many of his clients, both black and white, survived because they had heeded his warnings. The accuracy of his prediction, made 2 years earlier, brought him both fame and renewed danger. A New Orleans newspaper, the Times-Picayune, published an article in November 1870. The Negro businessman Isaiah Freeman, who predicted the current cotton crisis in 1868, has emerged as a voice of surprising authority in commercial circles. While many denounce him as a charlatan or worse, the accuracy of his prediction cannot be denied. Whether through intelligence, intuition, or mere luck, Freeman saw what experienced white planters did not, that the South's dependence on cotton was leading to inevitable collapse. The question now is, what else does he see that we do not? That question terrified white supremacists, because if Isaiah could predict economic collapses, what else could he anticipate? Political changes, social upheaval, the continued rise of black economic and political power during Reconstruction, In December 1870, Isaiah received a visit from three white men who identified themselves as concerned citizens. They offered him $10,000, an enormous sum, to leave Louisiana permanently and never return to the South. Isaiah's response was recorded in a letter he wrote to a friend. "They offered me money to disappear. They are afraid of what I represent, proof that intelligence has no color, that a black man can outthink white men, and that the system they built on the premise of our inferiority is a lie. I told them I would not leave. I told them that I will continue to do business, to make predictions, and to demonstrate that black people are capable of anything white people can do. They threatened violence. I told them, you can kill me, but you cannot kill what I've proven. Every black person who succeeds, who builds, who thinks clearly, we are all evidence that your entire civilization is built on a lie." They left angry. I do not expect them to leave me alone. They didn't. But what happened next was not what anyone expected. On January 10th, 1871, Isaiah Freeman was summoned to testify before a congressional committee investigating violence and economic suppression against black people in the South. The committee was part of the federal government's effort to enforce Reconstruction and protect black civil rights. The testimony, preserved in congressional records, provides the most detailed first-hand account of Isaiah's life and abilities. Committee Chairman, Mr. Freeman, you have been described as a man of unusual predictive abilities. Can you explain how you make these predictions? Isaiah Freeman: I observe patterns, Congressman. I watch how people behave, how markets move, how decisions lead to consequences. I remember everything I see and hear, and I think about what those patterns mean for the future. It's not magic, it's attention and analysis. Committee member: But you had no formal education. How did you learn to analyze complex economic systems? Isaiah Freeman: Sir, I was enslaved for 25 years. During that time, I watched white people manage plantations, conduct business, and make decisions. I learned how they thought, how systems worked, and where their thinking was flawed. Slavery taught me to be observant. Your survival depends on anticipating what powerful people will do. Freedom gave me the opportunity to use that skill for my own benefit, rather than theirs. Committee member: You predicted the cotton market collapse 2 years before it occurred. How? Isaiah Freeman: I looked at production data, soil quality, market competition, and historical price patterns. The collapse was inevitable. Any economist should have seen it, but most Southern economists were too invested in believing cotton was king to see objectively. I had no such investment. I saw the truth. Committee Chairman: What do you see now, Mr. Freeman? What predictions do you have for the future? Isaiah Freeman: I see that Reconstruction will fail. The federal government will eventually withdraw troops from the South. When that happens, white supremacists will regain control, and black people will be systematically stripped of rights through violence, legal manipulation, and economic exclusion. This will continue for generations. I also see that despite this, black people will survive, will build institutions, will preserve dignity, and will eventually reclaim the freedom that will be stolen from us. But it will take a very long time, and many people will suffer. The committee room, according to contemporary accounts, was silent after this prediction, because Isaiah had just described what would become Jim Crow, a system that wouldn't fully emerge for another 2 decades, but which Isaiah could already see forming. The congressional testimony made Isaiah nationally known. Northern newspapers published excerpts describing him as the prophet of Reconstruction and the visionary Freeman. Southern newspapers called him dangerous and a threat to social order. And within the black community, Isaiah became a symbol, proof that black intelligence, black business acumen, and black success were possible despite white supremacy's best efforts to prevent it. But fame brought the ultimate danger. On March 14, 1871, 3 months after his congressional testimony, Isaiah Freeman disappeared. He was last seen leaving his office in New Orleans at approximately 8 p.m. He never arrived home. His disappearance was reported to police, who conducted a minimal investigation and concluded he had likely run off or met with an accident. But testimony from witnesses, gathered years later, tells a different story. A black dock worker reported seeing Isaiah forced into a carriage by 4 white men. A laundress reported hearing screams from a warehouse near the river that night. A fisherman reported seeing a body thrown into the Mississippi River just before dawn. Isaiah's body was never found. No arrests were ever made. The case was closed within a month. But here is what we know. Isaiah Freeman's business assets, his warehouses, his investments, his property, were seized by white creditors within weeks of his disappearance through legal mechanisms that were transparently fraudulent but went unchallenged by authorities. A letter from a New Orleans attorney to a colleague discovered in private papers in 1932 provides context. The Freeman matter has been resolved. The Negro will not be returning. His assets have been transferred to appropriate parties. It is unfortunate that such measures were necessary, but the man had become too prominent, too wealthy, and too influential. He was giving other Negroes ideas about what they might achieve. That could not be allowed. Order has been restored. Isaiah Freeman was murdered, not legally executed. That would have required a trial and might have created a martyr. Simply disappeared, killed quietly, and erased from public memory. He was 33 years old. But Isaiah's story doesn't end with his death, because what he predicted came true, with horrifying accuracy. Reconstruction did fail. Federal troops withdrew from the South in 1877. White supremacists did regain control through violence and legal manipulation. Jim Crow laws were enacted, systematically stripping black people of voting rights, economic opportunities, and legal protections. This system lasted for nearly a century. But Isaiah's other prediction also came true. Black people survived. They built institutions, schools, churches, businesses, organizations. They preserved culture and dignity despite systematic oppression. And eventually, through the civil rights movement and beyond, they reclaimed rights that had been stolen. Every successful black business owner, every black person who analyzes systems and sees patterns, every black person who uses intelligence to navigate a world designed to limit them, they are all inheritors of what Isaiah demonstrated, that intelligence has no color, that observation and analysis can overcome barriers, and that the premise of black inferiority is a lie. In the decades after Isaiah's death, his story was largely forgotten, deliberately erased by white historians and overwhelmed by the thousands of other stories of black achievement that were suppressed during Jim Crow. But fragments remained. In black communities, stories were told about the man who could see the future and who had built a fortune despite being born enslaved. In business schools, though rarely acknowledged, Isaiah's cotton market prediction became a case study in economic analysis. And in 1965, a historian named John Hope Franklin discovered Isaiah's congressional testimony while researching Reconstruction. Franklin published an article about Isaiah in the Journal of Negro History, bringing his story back into public awareness. That article described Isaiah not as a mystic or prophet, but as what he was: an analyst, a strategist, a businessman who used observation and intelligence to predict outcomes in a world of patterns. Franklin wrote, "Isaiah Freeman was not supernatural. He was simply a man who paid attention, who thought clearly, and who refused to accept that his enslavement or his race defined his intellectual capacity. His tragedy was not that he possessed unusual abilities. It was that American society in 1871 could not tolerate a black man who demonstrated those abilities so publicly and successfully." The final piece of Isaiah's story comes from an unexpected source, a letter discovered in 2003 in a private collection in Boston. The letter, dated 1869, was written by Isaiah to an unknown recipient. Dear friend, you asked me once if I truly can see the future. I cannot. I see patterns. I see how human nature repeats itself. I see how systems, once established, follow predictable paths unless disrupted by force. I see that white people in the South will never willingly accept black equality, because accepting it would mean acknowledging that everything they built, their wealth, their status, their self-image, was based on a lie. That truth is too painful. They will resist it with violence, with law, with every tool available. I also see that this resistance will eventually fail, not in my lifetime, perhaps not in my children's lifetime, but eventually, because truth has a weight that lies cannot sustain forever. Every black person who learns, who builds, who succeeds, we are all proof of that truth, and proof accumulates. I have made money predicting markets, but here is my most important prediction. We will be free. Truly free, not just legally but economically, politically, socially. It will take longer than it should. It will cost more than it should, but it will happen. And when it does, I hope someone remembers that there were people who saw it coming, who believed in it even when it seemed impossible, who built toward it even knowing they would never live to see it. That is the future I see. That is the future I work for. And no amount of hatred or violence can make me unsee it. Your friend, Isaiah Freeman. This letter, written 2 years before his murder, is perhaps Isaiah's truest legacy. Not his predictions about cotton markets or weather patterns, but his prediction about the long arc of justice. His belief that intelligence, persistence, and truth would eventually overcome systematic oppression. He was right. It took over a century. It cost countless lives. The struggle continues. But the trajectory he predicted, from slavery to Reconstruction to Jim Crow to civil rights to today, is the trajectory history followed. Isaiah Freeman saw it coming, and he died believing in it. If this story moved you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel. These stories of vision, strategy, and resilience need to be remembered, not just as history, but as proof of what intelligence and determination can achieve, even in the face of systematic oppression. Isaiah Freeman was not magic. He was brilliant, and he paid the ultimate price for refusing to hide that brilliance.